Attention, attention, stop what you're doing. Because we're coming back to the Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
Oh my God!
They went a little crazy with it, and I appreciate it.
Now let's get back with Hal Sparks' radio program, Mega Worldwide.
So, a lot of the conversation about our like help for Ukraine has been about, from the Rand Pauls of the world, has been about how much we're giving this money to them. MTG came out about this as well, giving all this money to them. And for what, when we can't even have baby formula here, even though it's not it's an issue of toxicity, not availability. Believe me, that factory could tomorrow start cranking out all the baby formula it could make. There'd be plenty of it on the shelves. It'd be Russian roulette for your kid, and that's apparently fine by MTG, but whatever. But the money spent to this point, the initial $13 billion that was allocated, along with which, by the way, has a portion of humanitarian aid, just like the $40 billion is about an even split, about 20-20, and the Lend-Lease program is exactly that. It is a loan paid off. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get the year wrong, but England just paid off its Lend-Lease program from World War II in like 2005.
Jeez.
Something like that. It's a very low interest loan for the cost of gear, but they did. They absolutely did. That money made its way over time back to the United States and ended up zeroing out they just drew a line through it in the books in 2005. All done. England paid back the money given to them to fight World War II from the United States through the Lend-Lease program. And I want to say it's 2005, 2006. And now they owe us nothing. And we made money on the deal, theoretically. Like there was some like 0.2% interest or whatever it was on whatever was allocated at that time. And the same thing is true of this program for Ukraine, and they're aware of this. Now, the budget for Afghanistan for 2020 alone was $17 billion, and was at that point the lowest amount allocated because it was the previous budget from 2016, and the Obama administration had been winding down funding, and so it sort of the strategic planning from like 6 years prior, whatever the previous NDAA had targeted this taper, and that taper happened in 2017, and then because of COVID, the expenditure was lower, because there was a lot, even with the money going out, they couldn't do. Okay, but still, $17 billion, a good $4 billion more than we had spent in practical terms, and good, I would say, $12 billion more than we spent on direct military assistance, because a lot of our stuff went to humanitarian aid, help transport, getting people in and out, helping refugees, giving money to Poland and the outlying NATO countries where they went to, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that funding went there. A good portion of it was military gear, but not all of it. Not all of that $13.1 or $13.6 billion was for that. Same thing with this allocation of this $40 billion, including the Lend-Lease, which $20 billion of it, you're going to get money back over time because you're doing this program. Now, that said, by the time you calculate direct military assistance and all that, the outlay of money from the U.S. government for the war in Ukraine to support the Ukrainians will be less than the budgetary outlay for the last year of Obama's budget for Afghanistan by a good $5 billion. So the clamoring and the wailing and gnashing of teeth by the right wing, Rand Paul and MTG and Gates and stuff, both saying, why are we giving this money? It's less in direct military aid than 2020's budget. And by the way, I'm pretty sure 2021 the budget was agreed on the year before when Trump was still president. It was slightly higher leading up to the evacuation. And we had to put more money in to get everybody out. But 2 weeks after we got out, August of 2021, when, the Trump crowd and everybody's saying the worst, most embarrassing moment in American history of, and by the way, worst military mistake in world history or something, if you totally erase Vladimir Putin's adventurism in Ukraine, as which they are not willing to do. 2 weeks after that, Kamala Harris led a trip to Asia to begin what was the administration's pivot to countering China again. When the Obama administration was on their way out, one of the things they put in place was TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade partnership that had the stench of NAFTA all over it because people just had a bad taste in their mouth about trade deals at that point. They just thought these are free trade deals and they will undermine, they're going to ship factory jobs overseas. Like all the talk that you heard about NAFTA, what it did was going to happen in spades in this other thing, which, by the way, most of the jobs that were going to be shifted to Asia were already there, meaning the factories that were set up in China. The difference about TPP was about diversifying where those factories went to so they wouldn't all end up in China, and China wouldn't have a hegemonic control over the South China Seas and the surrounding nations and basically put a thumb on Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, all these countries by eventually just controlling all production in that area. There was a double whammy that occurred around this. One, the Biden administration came in fully intending, left over from Biden's feelings that he made very clear in the Obama administration and that he ran on, that we needed to counter China's growth, and that a lot of that countering wasn't just business for America, but it was also the civil rights aspect of what was happening to the Uyghurs, slave labor, forced labor in a bunch of areas, and that had to be a factor in whether American companies continued to do business in those, in China, and it had to be part of the conversation. And it was always going to be bad, and it was going to get worse. And as China got more desperate, as their demographics started to collapse over the next 5 to 10 years, that those desperate acts of slave labor and stuff are going to increase. They are not going to decrease. They're going to use more and more people they don't consider, purely Chinese, to do factory work and sew clothes and pick cotton and assemble electronics and the like. So the Biden administration, Biden came in with that chip on his shoulder already about China. And all the talk from the right wing about Hunter Biden's attachment to China and all the business that they had there, one of the most ridiculous things about that is that A, it's not true, but B, if it was the worst investment China ever made. Because if your job was to pay off Hunter Biden and thereby the big guy, to keep him from doing exactly what he's doing right now, you failed miserably. The control that money that didn't even pass through the family, didn't even pass through Hunter Biden's hands, was, much of it predating his time with Rosemont Seneca. All of that stuff, if it was meant to be a control point, it was totally ineffective. If anything, counterproductive. Because 2 weeks after we get out of Afghanistan, and Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Rand Paul all still using the phrase America getting into these quote-unquote forever wars, when it was indeed the last 3 administrations who said, we got to get out, we're going to get out, and it was Biden that did it. We are not in any practical, we're not in Afghanistan at all. Trump wanted to keep us in there. He wanted to keep Bagram forever. So the idea that he was ever going to get out is an absurdity. I don't know why he says it at rallies now. It's not even like it's a mystery. But the Biden administration came in, immediately formed this brand new nuclear-powered submarine alliance with Australia, with UK, called the AUKUS Agreement, Japan, and immediately started meeting with Japan about joining that, so that it would be the AUKUS agreement, where they would patrol effectively the South China Seas and make available these nuclear-powered subs, not nuclear-armed, nuclear-powered, very different. The only difference is they can run silent and stay undersea for weeks, if not months at a time. And sharing that technology in a defensive sense to protect Taiwan, and China now having to wonder if the Strait of Taiwan, in between the mainland and Taiwan itself, how many nuclear subs it has floating in that area, how many subs it has tracking them in the area, nuclear-powered subs again, that will give Taiwan a lot of warning if China does its one Hail Mary that could give it Taiwan, which is every able-bodied Chinese guy of fighting age gets in a fishing boat and doesn't even wait for a military transport, just attacks the island and runs over it through attrition, just bulldozing it with human beings like World War Z or something. That if anything short of that, Taiwan will have plenty of warning, and they have been preparing for this fight. Unlike Ukraine, which has only been preparing since 2014, essentially, for their fight with Russia. Getting on their feet, and only since 2019 taking it really seriously when Zelensky came in. The Taiwanese have been ready for this and have been threatened with it for the better part of 50 years. They are not going to be caught flat-footed. We have American Marines on the beach in Taiwan training them right now. Stuff we couldn't do directly with even the Ukrainians before 2015. So, Biden forms what's to be the AUKUS agreement. The AUKUS is already in place. We are already parking nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed subs in Australian ports that formerly had Belt Road Initiative Chinese projects in them that were loaded with spyware that the Australian government just kicked out. Now, on top of that, we reformed the Quad, which is a group of nations, basically Australia, India, the United States, and Japan. No. Yeah. Anyways, four-country collective dealing with trade and security in that part of the world. Basically, that had been languishing on the vine. So, and now, at the beginning of this process, and this is the ASEAN event that's part of Biden's trip this week, is about, effectively, without TPP, just having a generalized, smaller unilateral agreements and a shared partnership agreement, because we don't have trade issues with any of these smaller countries, to act as a bulwark against China's growth in the region. Just as China is shutting itself down, cutting itself off from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is saying, you know what, all the money I made in China, having a factory over there that I may have saved, I lost it all during COVID. You zeroed out, any business zeroed out the gains of being in China in the first place just in the last 2 years. It turns out, for the long-term health of your company, you would have been just fine having your factory in the United States, Mexico, or Canada, if not in Vietnam, Malaysia, Japan, South Korea, and the like. And from this point forward, who do you trust to, if you're going to build a factory, to not use slave labor, to not lie about a contagion, to not steal from their workers, or not assume 50% control over it? And the answer increasingly worldwide is not China, anybody but China. And we are not the only country in the world reshoring all of their work. So we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. Again, if the goal was to bribe Biden, it was the most ineffective political bribe in world history. We'll be back.
This is Damian Perdue of Think Theory Radio, Saturdays at 6 p.m. You're listening to Hal Sparks radio program, Mega Worldwide.
I thought there was going to be like a new one every break. I was so excited.
You want more, Hal?
I don't know why.
We'll give you more.
I do.
Hal Sparks radio program, mega worldwide on Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820. Hoo-yah!
There's a little bit of, if there's drops in and out, I apologize. For whatever reason, I'm in what's called the gas lamp area of San Diego. And it's party central. These people don't know when to go home. It is what happens when you block off streets and have too much public transportation. Honestly, good times should require some kind of struggle. If you can get there too easy, you can make a mess and leave. It's like everything is like the downtown area is very quaint, very cool looking, very fun, and yet has sort of the septic nature of the area near the porta potties at Coachella at certain hours, just because they're like, New Orleans or something like that, where you're just like, yeah, this is where we go. All right, well, maybe there should just be, maybe you should build some sort of like Mayan temple kind of thing, just a lot of stairs, like you have to do the effort to get up the steps, just get there, Anybody who has real physical difficulty gets some help, but anybody who's able-bodied should have to make the trek to earn their spot, so they take it a little seriously, because it's right now it's sort of like a drain. Anyways, but as I'm in hectic party central, I have no doubt that someone has thrown up on my the building's router that I'm in and messed up the internet.
They must.
Yeah, I believe it.
I can tell when we freeze because the chat just starts spinning like a fast thing.
Yeah, it stops. It's like jockeying for bit position, right? So apologies for everybody that's just road stuff. The upcoming shows that I have on the road, including I'm at the Whiskey on Tuesday doing the Ultimate Jam Night. We're doing Britain Rocks, and so I'll be singing some British material amongst other famous guests and fun people. That'll be fairly solid. That my Tuesday shows will be okay, and next weekend I'm at home, so we should be all right. Apologies if there's any of this. Now, as I was saying, the pivot on China about dealing with the Chinese government's very distinct move back to pre-Deng Xiaoping economic and social control strategies. So basically the new Maoism over there, which was, for anybody who cares to look, horrible for the Chinese people. Millions starved to death. There was no growth at all in the country. People were, forced to meet quotas for food that basically created this rotating Holodomor throughout the more impoverished areas of China. And it had a very distinct, it was very reminiscent of the imperial system. There's really no difference to the experience of the average Chinese person that they called it a communist regime under Mao, and that Mao was the chairman and an emperor who just doesn't care. I mean, materially, there was no difference in how the average Chinese person was treated. Deng Xiaoping comes in, opens China up. They start interacting with the rest of the world. And as soon as they do, the greatest advance forward, quickly of any society in history, as far as a flood of commerce and like the growth of the Chinese middle class. They were, we've all heard stories of how many millionaires they were printing every week. Well, Xi Jinping over the last year has started showing up in his Mao suit again, and has signaled a move back to pre-Deng Xiaoping attitudes. An isolationist China, not interacting with the rest of the world at all. In many ways, while there's been a lot of talk about how China is watching what's going on in Ukraine and trying to judge whether they should attack Taiwan based on how well Russia's interaction with the rest of the world is, and what their military success is. There is an even bigger story, I believe, in their reaction to how the sanctions are affecting Russia. Famously, McDonald's just left Russia this week. And the Russian government said, you can keep McDonald's open, just call it something else, and just make the stuff and just call it, you know, like McDowell's or in Coming to America. McDougal's, what was it? Yeah.
McDougal's, yeah.
Right, it was McDougal's. Yeah, it's just like McDougal's. Just, you know, call it that, and if you get copyright, who cares? Intellectual property rights don't matter. Really taking a page out of China's in that regard and saying we're just going to have, like, Coca-Cola was launched this week, which is they took the old Coca-Cola bottling plant that was there because Coke moved out and started printing a new label that looks basically like Coke, but it has this thing KOMI because of the region, not like communist cola, but whatever. And so China has been looking at how Russia has been dealing with this, basically creating a bubble over its country, turning the internet into an intranet, cutting itself off from the rest of the world for all practical purposes, even for use ultimately with a VPN, doing a hard cutoff at some point, where, of course, Putin and everybody around him will be able to have, they'll be able to buy Elon Musk's Starlink if they want and use it. The rich people will have that. Poor people will just be cut off and isolated and only get their internet and only get their news from the state. China has been, that has been the only partnership between Russia and China as far as strategy that has really taken hold. And China has begun that process as well. They've always had a very, what is effectively an intranet, unless it's to do business. And even that is heavily regulated. They're looking at what Russia's doing, going, oh, we'll just have, instead of Coca-Cola, we'll have Coca-Cola. Instead of McDonald's, we'll have McDougal's. We'll just do that, and we'll have basically all the same stuff, but it'll be our own internalized version of it, and we don't have to do business with anybody else. Well, Russia, as much as it's got a lot of crap land that doesn't have a lot of people on it, that's permafrost 80% of the year, the arable land that they do have produces a pretty enough food where they're a net exporter and have been for a long time. China is a net importer of food. China is a net importer of energy. China's energy and food needs are increasing, not decreasing, and their own internal creation of both energy and food are decreasing. That is a recipe for disaster. That is, and then tying that to this Xi Jinping, go back to the Mao system, is incredibly dangerous for the Chinese people. And the only way to keep that system afloat is a lowering of the population intentionally, is the death of poor people. You can't feed them anymore. You don't have the trucks to carry the food out to the places that don't grow food, and the food that you do have has to go to the areas that are making your fake cola and all that kind of stuff. So all of this is going to amount to disaster for them. And the idea that somehow the storyline about China eating our lunch and Russia being this, stud muffin military, super leader, hyper buff, bare-chested, bear-riding, version of He-Man cartoons that's as absurd as the concept of Chinese economic hegemony going forward. And we'll talk about this when we come back with our guest Philip Ittner, who's live in Kiev with us in front of a place with the greatest pickles on earth, and I'm still jealous. If you don't know that, you will. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Park Radio program, mega worldwide. Now with 100% more Johnny Million. Follow at Johnny Million 1 on Twitter and at House Sparks on Twitter. We'll be back right after this.
You're listening to the House Sparks radio program, mega worldwide.
I've had people walk out of me before, but not when I was being so charming.
Video streaming at housesparks.com.
I don't care for you or for the putrid sludge you're troweling out.
Damn, puss-faced little pimpstick.
True progressive talk.
Might be a good time for you guys to give up.
Well, welcome back to the show. It's the House Park Radio program, mega worldwide, and with us live from Kiev is our dear friend Philip Ittner, who is we're always glad to hear from him just because we like him. We're also always glad to hear from him because that means he's safe and well, and that's also something. that as much as I love you, Philip, I carry around this like, hope Philip's okay, hope Philip's okay, hope Philip's okay all the time.
No, come on.
That's
not
true.
my first rodeo.
No, I know that, but I also carried around about our dear friend Malcolm Nance. I'm like, hope Malcolm's okay, hope Malcolm's okay. Like every time he tweets, I'm like,
Malcolm's good. Malcolm is. I've been in communication with him over the last week. He's fine. He's out doing his thing. He's out doing his thing.
He's good at it, right? This is, the latest news, and I just we'll talk about this a little bit, but Putin is apparently taking these regular breaks for medical treatment of an undisclosed nature. And one of the best sources on this stuff is a guy named Christopher Steele, who most people know that name because that's the name of that's the name of the guy who used to sleep with Ivanka Trump. I'm kidding. It's no, that's true actually. Supposedly, it's alleged that he was the guy who wrote the Steele dossier for the Washington Free Beacon, which is a right-leaning newspaper in Washington that wanted to take down Trump before he, gained too much ground. And then once he was obviously going to run away with it, they decided, nah, we're on his side now. Forget it. We're going to back the winner rather than have any real ethics or morals. And then they shelved it. And so Fusion GPS, which was the company they hired to get Christopher Steele to do this, sold it to the Clinton campaign. Clinton campaign got it and went, we're not going to put out stuff about a PP tape. We're going to win anyways. We don't need to go after this guy for this stuff. We'll talk about the Russian connection because that's in the news anyways, but we're not going to use any of this. And literally, Christopher Steele and some of the other people at Fusion GPS, including a lawyer for Sussman, who's a lawyer for Hillary Clinton, went, guys, this is serious. I know you don't want to use it to push back against this dude, but this is criminal. This is dangerous. And Sussman went to the FBI and to the CIA ultimately and said, this is some serious stuff. Are you guys taking this seriously? And now Durham, the whole Durham report is that Sussman didn't tell them he was there on behalf of Hillary Clinton because he wasn't. He was actually going rogue from the campaign, who he viewed as not taking it seriously enough, which is why, by the way, the Durham indictments all get put in a shredder by any judge they're in front of, and they're garbage. But we're hearing from Christopher Steele that not only is Putin taking these breaks from meetings to get in transfusions, we don't know, nobody's saying, but there's increasing disarray in the Kremlin, and that in between these medical treatments, he's acting on a colonel level, talking about, Philip froze on us. He'll probably jump back in a second, hopefully. There he is. Okay, good. That Putin himself is micromanaging the war now. What have you heard, from that end, Philip? And what's your kind of current update from Kiev as you understand it, and what the talk of the town is?
Yeah. Well, I've been studying the former Soviet Union since I lived in Moscow back in the late 90s at the end of the Yeltsin era. So I want to touch a couple of quick things before I get into what I'm hearing here about the Steele dossier in particular. And I really wish that the whole PP tape thing is just regrettable because, that was such a small part of that report.
Right.
And it was the addendum. It was the human int that the PP tape came from.
Right.
And it was Steele saying, look, I'm hearing this. I have no way of confirming this. But the rest of the Steele report has real solid meat there.
Yeah.
And there is information there that was backed up by several sources, not just human intelligence, but also electronic transmissions and, intercepted communications about how compromised Trump was primarily financially to the Russians. And that's why there was the point where they took it to the FBI because they were like, this goes beyond a campaign. This is a national security issue. So I really wish that PP tape thing didn't capture the imagination of everybody.
Right.
But it did. Now, as for his health, he's clearly not well. I mean, the man is puffy. He doesn't look normal. That has happened
I do not look
several
normal.
times.
Right. Johnny always takes this part of the conversation personally.
Right down into the gutter. Thank you, Johnny.
But go ahead.
He doesn't. It's happened several times over the last few years where he'll come out. It even got to the point where the conspiracy theorists were like, "Oh, there's a couple of different, there are duplicates out there." There's, his facial, the state of him would change so rapidly between public appearances that people were like, "Oh, there's more than one Putin." No, it's probably because he's on a whole bunch of steroids.
Right.
Getting treatment.
Right. The prednisone is going to keep him up and walking around, and God knows what kind of Hitler juice they've got him on, along with stimulants to keep him awake. And again, the guy cannot be sleeping well. It's stressful enough to run a country anyways that's got the problems that Russia has. On top of that, you create the worst military debacle in the world, and your own friends are turning on you to the point where he had to replace all of his staff, all of his, the equivalent of the Secret Service detail, and his own chef, the dude who's been with him forever. He swapped out all those people. I mean, that alone will make you puffy.
Yeah, I'll do one last thing, and then let's talk about what's happening internally here within Ukraine and within Kiev. And that is this. I have a very dear friend of mine who is a Russian, he's a Russian journalist. And he has some very, very good sources inside the Kremlin. And he's been telling me for the better part of a year, over a year really, that there are people within his personal protection, the Presidential Protection Agency, which is like our Secret Service. So we're not talking about a small group. This is a organ of the Russian security service. Don't you take advantage of that, Johnny. And so there are lots and lots of them. So the fact that one of them might actually be leaking, again, don't take advantage, is not unlikely. And my friend, my Russian journalist friends, sourced within the Presidential Protection Services say they are terrified about his mental status, that he is not well physically and he's not well mentally. COVID and living in a bunker has really done a job on him. And he is unpredictable at best. And they don't know who he's talking to because he's now no longer going through Kremlin communication lines. He's doing it directly. And they're just, I mean, the man is coming apart at the seams. And this is only making the situation worse. And you're right. Now let's talk about the war. He apparently...
Hold on. Hold that thought. Hold that thought, because there's a little bit of a lag. So I want you to hold that thought at that pinpoint and bring it back.
Here is micromanaging this thing.
Yes,
and it's not good.
Sorry, we're getting a little bit of difficulty with him in.
You're back.
Kip. There we go. Thank you. Yes, there you go. We can still hear you. It's just fine. There was a bit of a stagger. It happens. And by the way, it gave me a moment to actually slip in the joke that apparently, if I'm hearing you right, that Putin's organ is leaking and he doesn't use protection. That's I was a little choppy, but I think that's what I took from it. And he doesn't have protection. I jumped in before Johnny could. I just dove Matrix style.
I give that to you on a platter, dear sir. On a platter.
Anyway,
there you go.
So let's pick up from what's going on in Kiev, which is where you were. Okay, there you go. Actually, you know what? Hold that thought. I take it back. Let's take a break.
Well,
let's take a break. Hold that thought.
Sure.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about what's going on in Kiev and kind of word on the street there as well. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. At Philip Ittner, if you want to follow him, 1L, 2 T's, like a boss. And we'll be back right after this.
Hello.
Welcome back to the show. Philip Ittner's with us. He's live in Kiev right now, taking a little trip back to Lviv and then coming back to Kiev, where he's going to set up a semi-permanent base. All humans are semi-permanent. That's how we live. But for the better part of it. And so, Philip, you were saying before we went to break kind of what the word on the street there and the expectation is, because the funding went through this week. And I'm sure that was part of the buzz. And I bet Rand Paul was talked about almost as much if not more so than Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, who actually went there.
Yeah, it's the land lease thing is a huge deal, and there's a high-ranking member of the Ukrainian military who is kind of broken out on his own and been very vocal. He knew the borders that were established post 1991 in the fall of the Soviet Union. So that would be even more than what Zelensky is asking for. Zelensky's kind of he's been a little bit open to the idea of maybe making a special status for the breakaway republics in Lugansk and Donetsk, and then Crimea is a whole other thing. But this guy is coming out in the Ukrainian military, and he is saying when we get everything, we are going to be in a place where we can push it all the way back to where it was supposed to be in 1991. And by that, he means Crimea as well. Now, the problem with that is that equally, the Russians have said during this conflict, because everybody's so scared of their nuclear arsenal, is that, we had Dmitry Peskov talking with Christian Amanpour, and he said, our doctrine is that we will not use nuclear weapons unless we feel that our territorial integrity is threatened. Well, in Moscow's mind, that includes Crimea because they had their referendum, and I'm doing it in air quotes for those of us, for those of you only listening on the radio. That referendum was done under the gun. So, but as far as Moscow is concerned, it's legit, and that's part of Russia now. So if Ukraine does try to take back Crimea, then the Russians might actually get into a mindset where they think they're justified in using nukes, which is terrifying.
Yeah, the tactical nukes, which, while low yield and very dangerous, do make, sections of land unlivable in a way. These are way smaller than, think, Hiroshima and Nagasaki and that kind of stuff. They're just, messy or dirty. They're closer in impact to a semi-permanent biological weapon than they are to the big, giant mushroom cloud kind of stuff that we're talking about. And that's the difference between,
still a nuke, though.
Still a nuke, totally, absolutely. It's still in a massive impact.
And you can't... Yeah, and I was having a roundtable conversation about this, and I said, the problem is that you can't unring that bell.
Right.
And so, once he uses a nuke, even a low yield, the day after that, you got to ask, okay, and then what? Right. Because the day after he uses a nuke, he turns Russia into the DPRK, and the DPRK, the North Korea. Can be North Korea because they only have two borders. Right. But Russia is massive. And, a Russia that is transformed into the hermit kingdom of the DPRK is completely it's unmanageable. It
will collapse. It will divide itself up. Right. And that's exactly where they find themselves. It also means, depending on where they would use said tactical nuke, the idea is, do they strike Kiev? Do they strike Lviv or Kharkiv, like one of the big cities, to show they mean business? Or do they strike Crimea itself to hit the forces there? While at the same time, in all of those cases, in all those cities and in the Crimean territory or anywhere around it, you're basically nullifying a useful territory that they're ultimately attempting to claim for themselves. So all this clamoring is one thing, but they have intention to use this land going forward. One of the reasons why they've stuck to conventional warfare, and there's an argument as to why they haven't, they blow up the cities, but they don't, bomb the grasslands where a lot of the troops are sometimes to just pepper the entire area, is because they plan on using the farmland, and they don't want it dusted with, depleted uranium rounds and garbage like that. That's a strategic element they have to take into account. It would be different, for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example, if those two cities were port cities the U.S. had relied on for decades and would have to rely on going forward. That never would have happened. And that's part of where they find themselves. There's also a bunch of people, I think, in his oligarchical crowd around him that will throw themselves in front of that button because it means the end of their financial life as they know it. You can't have that both ways. You can't be a rich.
No. As I say,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's a matter of, okay, you dropped a low yield tactical nuke, and now what? And now what's the day after that happens? Remember, you're a child of the 80s as well as I am. You remember that movie, The Day After, right? Well, I mean, okay, so you drop the nuke. What happens after that? And it'll be catastrophic for Moscow. It'll be catastrophic for Putin. I mean, it'll knock me out. I mean, because I'm right in the middle of Kiev, and this is high on their target list. So I had a Ukrainian friend. I was going to do a vlog with a Ukrainian friend of mine, and she at the last minute said, you know what, I've rethought it, and I'm not coming back. I'm staying in Mexico, which is where she is currently. So, I mean, it's very real. It's very real. People are very concerned about it.
Right. And a reasonable thought to have, because there's, and it does not help that all signs point to Putin not being well, both physically and mentally. But again, this is one of those situations where you're lucky that he's surrounded by greedy scumbags instead of hardliners, the Himmels and Rommels and like Putin's inner circle, who were true believers about German blood. If you had this kind of Hydra thing, cut off one head and two will replace it, that everybody worried about with the Germans, and to some degree with Imperial Japan, you don't have that with Russia. I mean, these are rich dudes who got rich acting as vampires on their own country and don't have any interest in being covered in dirt for the motherland anytime soon. They've just not. That's one of the reasons. Even the soldiers have a problem with that. Ukrainians are willing to do that because they're fighting for the actual existence of their families, the existence of their country, the sovereignty of their land. All the things that are worth fighting for are on the Ukrainian side. On the Russian side, it's a farce. None of the people want to be there. And so even the forces that are there who want to be there the most are there because they're getting paid to. Effectively, they're you're getting Chechen bonuses or something for killing more Ukrainians. But that's not the same as fighting tooth and nail. And eventually you're going to bug out. And that's the entirety of the Russian force right now. And a lot of them, I mean, there's reports of like groups of as large as 500 running back across the Russian border and going, I'm not going back in there. Why would they? Most of the Russian citizens that are in Donbass and Crimea that they talk about have been, moved out of the country as well to protect them allegedly on behalf of Russia. And those that are there are being used as human shields by the Russian forces. Like, well, you're killing citizens. Like, yeah, you're pushing them in front of you as you start creeping forward. But, this is not the war Russia needed or wanted to fight. And so using a tactical nuke would just it would just make this decision deeper and worse. And there is no way Russia enters. You're calling them the DPRK at that point is absolutely right. There is no version of reality going forward where they aren't a pariah amongst all countries that produce anything worth having or make anything worth using.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a small thing, but it's an important thing as well, is that this is the birthplace of a Slavic identity. The whole idea of what it is to be a Slav was born right here. It's called Kievan Rus. It is, I mean, I don't think that's going to be a deterrent for a guy like Putin, but it would be his own people, I think, would be. I mean, I'm in contact with my friends back in Russia, and you're in your 20s or your 30s, and you're Russian right now. You are not happy, right? Because your future does not look good.
Yes. Are they racing? Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are drag racing in the background.
We've got a biker gang. We've got a biker gang. Just came right past.
Ooh. All right,
they're having fun. Saturday night in Kiev.
Right. Hey, you got to live while you're alive. The interesting thing, and this is we'll talk about this after the break, and we're going to take questions, of course, in the chat room at infotainmentwars.com and on twitch.tv/HalSparks. If you want to, if you have a question for Philip about what's going on there, The illusion of a Chinese-Russian alliance that has been bandied about all over right-wing media in the United States is one of the goofiest geopolitical theories in existence. It is right up there with, we faked the moon landing and the Earth is flat and surrounded by an ice wall that is patrolled by the UN. Like, it is, not only are they adversarial. Yeah, the Pentaveret. I'm wearing my Pentaveret shirt, actually, right now. I don't know if you can see that. But because I'm a tacit member, apparently. We'll talk about that on the other side of the break when we take some questions as well. But this idea that they are somehow, that this allegiance is based on any kind of, like, genuine cooperation is cartoonish. And the fact that it will benefit either one instead of just like, it's like two lead weights trying to keep each other from drowning by clinging to each other. It is absurd in the extreme. We'll talk about a little bit of that when we come back.
There's more likely to be an alliance between Russia and the GOP.
Right. Yeah. And currently, for all practical purposes, and what they need to be, their needs getting met, that is what's happening. Rand Paul and his crowd and the Trump crowd who are crying for, we need to just stop the funding and let Russia win to save Ukrainian lives from the inevitable, which again, if you made this argument before the war, there might have been some open ears. Now it's just absurd. It's just, and cruel, I would say. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. More with our dear friend Philip Hittner, who's live in Kiev after this, and Johnny Million rounding up your questions. We'll be back.